The Muqaddimah, An Introduction to History, the classic Islamic history of the world, by Ibn Khaldun, translated and introduced by Franz Rosenthal. Many Westerners have no idea that what we think of as the European Renaissance took place because of Christianity interacting with Islam. It was Islamic scholars who preserved and translated the ancient Greek and Roman books, which Europe had allowed to rot away as their culture died along with the Roman Empire. It was not until the end of the Middle Ages that Western culture once again became receptive to the ideas of the classical writers, and so it spawned a technological advancement in free societies that, ironically, led Western culture to surpass the Arabic culture that had preserved these works of knowledge. This is what makes Ibn Khaldun so fascinating, as his scientific mind was a treasure of the ages. Had Arab culture continued in his footsteps and built upon his works of the scientific method of a free and inquisitive mind, there is no telling how the history of the world would have changed up to the present. What gained my attention from this book was the closing chapter. Go here to the table of contents. He has 6 chapters in this book. The final chapter doesn't tell you much from the title. It says the various kinds of sciences, the methods of instruction. Look at the first section, man's ability to think. Now, if you think about a modern science like artificial intelligence, we know from science fiction that there are various fears of creating an intelligence that will run amok and destroy humanity. There's also the real practical problem of creating an artificial intellect. As computer scientists attempt to blindly grope from artificial intelligence to the next phase, artificial sentience, it's clear that there are no easy solutions. As a culture, we've gone to the moon, solved the genetic code, cracked the atom, and cloned sheep. But as the nature of intelligence remains a mystery to our best experts, how do you make a sentient being? Beyond the obvious expedient of sexual reproduction, of course. Nature provides examples. Some animals are tool users. Primates and birds can teach this skill to offspring. Some animals, without the ability to handle tools, such as dolphins, demonstrate remarkable intelligence. And it's clear to any animal lover that household pets experience many, if not all, of the emotions that we do. But self-awareness, that sense of self, this is something exclusively in the domain of human beings. And probably the Neanderthals as well. But they're not here, so we can't ask them. When I was 13, I started teaching myself computer programming. The Central Processing Unit, CPU, performed mathematical calculations. The program you would write was like a grocery list. The CPU would start at the top and work its way down the list. Operation complete. Or perhaps it would run in a loop with various conditional responses. But it was no more a thinking machine than a dam with a lever diverting water from one course to another. That's not sentient. Note that I am not speaking of the mechanics of artificial intelligence, neural networks, quantum level encoding in our synapses, how memory is stored and accessed. That's where I think computer scientists get lost in the weeds. What the Muqaddimah relates in its final chapter is simply a description of the nature of our sentience. What is it? Ibn Khaldun does his best to explain, writing from his mind to ours from over 600 years ago. On man's ability to think, which distinguishes human beings from animals and enables them to obtain their livelihood. You can read the rest. For the modern humanist, already there is a conceptual problem with Khaldun appealing to using our faculties to study God. But if you look at the modern history of Islam and Islamic societies around the world, this is the very problem that Khaldun was seeking to address. A society which does nothing but worship will never advance. He is saying here to use the intellect you were born with to understand God, this world, and explore as much as you can from your limited perspective. I'm straying here from my objective of exploring how the Muqaddimah might teach us something of how to approach the concept of artificial intelligence. Look down here. And focus on this paragraph here. Perception, that is consciousness, on the part of the person who perceives, in his essence of things that are outside his essence, is something peculiar to living things to the exclusion of all other being and existent things. All of nature is an example of the above, where if you consider the motion of a butterfly, it is a beautiful thing to watch, but there is no sentience there, just a very tiny set of instructions, following mathematical principles, which natural selection has determined is the most efficient means of the butterfly to carry out its activities. The butterfly has senses just as man does, but it's how we receive those senses in our minds that set us apart from other life. A sentient computer will have the same requirement. Khaldun categorizes our ability to think in several degrees. The first degree is where we apprehend the natural world as it is. This discerning intellect allows man to see how to live in the natural environment, and to observe where changes in that environment would be beneficial to our existence, such as preparing provisions for the change of seasons, building defensive walls, or irrigating fields. Despite the many ways that humans can apply this first degree of thinking, it's still the same activity as what a hermit crab does when it makes a shell out of a seashell. The second degree is the ability to think, which provides man with the ideas and the behavior needed in dealing with his fellow men and in leading them. The second degree of Khaldun is the social ability of man to deal with other individuals and to work within groups to achieve a beneficial cause. This skill is enhanced by personal experience, from which you base new actions on, and the all-important command of history, without which a civilization cannot proceed. He terms this thinking the experimental thinker. Humans might work to dam a river, then build a village at the dam's base. It floods, and everybody drowns. Lesson learned. But the experiment was necessary to learn this lesson, such as where not to place your village. In artificial intelligence terms, this is where the nature versus nurture argument comes in. We can program a sentient AI with the nature we want it to start with, but it also needs to be able to learn on its own away from its parent programming, to make mistakes, to learn and grow as we do. The third degree of Khaldun is readily identifiable to anyone with knowledge of the scientific method. The third degree is the ability to think which provides the knowledge, or hypothetical knowledge, of an object beyond sense perception without any practical activity going with it. This is the speculative intellect. This is an all-encompassing statement on the nature of human activity. If you include religion as one of man's constructs, Khaldun is stating that the ability for individual humans to see beyond their own immediate needs is something that we can build on in groups and advance knowledge for its own sake. Isaac Newton's laws of physics had no readily identifiable practical uses when he published his unreadable masterwork, but others quickly saw applications in his scientific premises and began to expand them. This is how a collective consciousness can achieve more than what one man or woman can envision. 2. The world of the things that come into being as the result of action materializes through thinking. Khaldun couldn't have told you about nucleotides, DNA, or chromosomes, but he could readily identify that there was something special about living things which set them apart from inanimate objects. He termed it a divine power, but how you label the miracle of life is not relevant here, other than to note that it is truly amazing to see something that is alive and wonder why it is so. If you look at this chapter here, he speaks of how, because thinking perceives the order that exists among the things that come into being, he's referring to looking at a pile of rocks, for example, or looking at the course of a stream, either by nature or through arbitrary arrangement. Here, Khaldun relates something that is crucial to AI research. How would an AI know what it wants? Why would it want anything to start with? What is the impetus? A person can look at an arrangement of rocks and see a defensive wall. A person can look at the course of a stream and think, I can divert that into my fields to help the rain come when the rain doesn't come. But how does an AI think along these lines? Does an AI have need? We know there is such an impetus that is part of our own sentience because we have us as an example. But how would you make an AI feel the same way, to have intentions? This is what I meant by how interesting Ibn Khaldun's ruminations on the mind are. I believe his approach to sentience is telling us something that today's scientists compiling new techniques and structures in computer programming are missing the point of. You can have all the technological advancements in the world, but you still have to figure out why an AI would want to do anything, and would it want to do things even remotely similar to what motivates people. Hundreds of science fiction stories and movies explore that unpleasant question, usually to the detriment of the foolish humans who dared create a thinking machine without planning out how such a thing would deal with us once it achieved independent existence. For instance, if a man thinks of bringing into existence a roof to shelter him, he will progress in his mind from the roof to the wall supporting the roof, and then to the foundation upon which the wall stands. Here his thinking will end, and he will then start to work on the foundation, then go on to the wall, and then to the roof, with which his action will end. This is what is meant by the Quranic saying, the beginning of action is the end of thinking, and the beginning of thinking is the end of action. Notice that he's trying to make this relatable to his audience by citing scripture as he proceeds on his lessons on the scientific method. But think of this in terms of the above sequence as applied to an AI, and you'll already run into a number of perceptual and conceptual problems. The senses of man and his place in the natural world lead him to the above sequence of devising a roof, the need, and how to approach the problem. A man feels gravity. He understands intuitively that you need to build a foundation before you make walls and then a roof. Does an AI understand gravity? Feel what gravity is like? Something whose mind is floating in a cyberspace virtual cloud would have a difficult time perceiving the world as we do, at least with present technology. If you look at this next paragraph, thus human action in the outside world materializes only through thinking about the order of things. Again, we're back to that list. Remember the CPU proceeding through a grocery list as it executes the program. Once this order is taken into consideration, human actions proceed in a well-arranged manner. Sometimes. Now, how is it that man can have goals and make plans? Because our ancestors and animal relatives already do that. A hungry cheetah will climb a tree to reach a screeching primate. The cheetah has a goal and devises a plan. Perhaps there is a lesson here that our AI scientists would be well advised to try simulating cheetahs before tackling making an artificial human. The decision-making capability of an animal like a cheetah is astonishingly complex, so perhaps it is a small leap from that to sentience. On the other hand, the actions of living beings other than man are not well arranged. They lack the thinking that acquaints the agent with the order of things governing his actions. The ability to think is the quality of man by which human beings are distinguishable from other living human beings. The degree to which a human being is able to establish an orderly causal chain determines his degree of humanity. Khaldun is also groping here towards finding useful analogies. So he and I are facing the same problem. How do we make this a relatable concept? Part 3. The experimental intellect and how it comes into being. The statement means that a single human being cannot live by himself, and his existence can materialize only in association with his fellow men. Oh, that sounds really familiar. No man is an island. Now, computer scientists may look at this paragraph and see waste and folly. Why must war and strife be a part of our sentient existence? I would suggest that the failures of intellect, as detailed by Khaldun, depict a flaw in contemporary thinking about our culture. In our culture, we consider emotionless fictional beings like Spock and Data from Star Trek to be superior intellects. But what if our emotions are key to sentience? Then impassive thinkers like Spock and Data could not exist, or even be termed fully sentient. Emotions have always been seen by speculative fiction writers as an impediment to a higher plane of existence, but that does not describe what we are in our time or Khaldun's era, and there's no sign at any given rate that we were approaching some sort of emotionless state as human beings. Human beings are sentient because we can kill one another, because we can have irrational hatreds and irritations and artificial divisions. The same intellect that creates sonnets, symphonic compositions, great literature, art, and architecture can also be applied to tearing down what others have built. This would also imply a disquieting certainty that a sentient AI could not be considered fully sentient unless it was as capable of murder as a human being is, which implies that Asimov's 3 laws of robotics might not be a bad idea. Those political aspects and philosophical norms lead human beings from the things that are detrimental to them to those that are in their interest, and from evil to good. First, however, they must recognize the things that are evil and the detrimental effect of doing them from sound experience and current customs. Thus, they are distinguished from stray animals. This was an advanced notion for its time. Remember, he's writing in the late 1300s. Consider Christian Europe in Ibn Khaldun's time, where your actions and desires were determined by supernatural beings tempting you to good or evil. Here, Khaldun assigns no angels or devils to our whims and desires, but rather in terms of actions or desires being detrimental to ourselves or others. In this, he is an astute and early sociologist, if not humanist. The concepts bringing this about are not completely divorced from sensual perception. Khaldun notes here that humans do things that bring pleasure, and have to learn which things we want to do that need to be avoided that bring harm to ourselves or others. The very notion of pleasure being experienced by a sentient AI is problematic, as we are groping blindly in the 21st century about what that means. Khaldun's wisdom here is that this is a conceptual problem, not a mechanical one. Part of our sentient existence is this line right here, that we are not completely divorced from sensual perception. Until scientists figure out how to solve this problem and to bring this experience of humanity to artificial intelligence, we are not going to be able to make an artificial life form. Here's our final section. Yay! Those who follow this during their whole life become acquainted with every single problem, but things that depend on experience require time. You can follow the experience of fathers, teachers, and elders, learn from them, and accept their instruction. But people who have no knowledge or tradition in this respect, or people who are not willing to learn and to follow others' example, need long and careful study in order to be educated in these things. They are unfamiliar to them, and the knowledge they obtain of them is uneven. Their manners and dealings with others will be badly planned and show defects. Their chances of making a living among their fellow men will be spoiled. He who is not educated by his parents will be educated by time. An AI cannot think like a person out of the box, because we cannot think like this from the moment we're born. Such is the experimental intellect. And I'll pause here by saying my daughter is experimenting, pulling things down from the shelf right now. You could hear her during this entire piece, learning. Such is the experimental intellect. It is obtained after the discerning intellect that leads to action. And he closes by saying, God gave you hearing and vision and hearts, You are a little grateful. An over 600-year-old meditation on the nature of sentient thought, as provided by Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun. Thank you.